What if the people who promised to love you unconditionally secretly planned to steal your most precious possession and called you a burden behind your back? My name is Claire Morgan, and I'll never forget the moment I changed the locks to the house my parents once believed was theirs. They had just landed back from a 2-month European vacation I paid for using equity. They guilted me into pulling from a house my grandmother left solely to me. They returned, tanned, smiling, holding souvenirs and travel photos like trophies, expecting to walk right back into the home they'd slowly claimed as their own. But instead of a welcome hug or dinner waiting, they found an empty porch, locked doors, and a note taped to the inside of the glass pane. Surprise, a burden did this. Yeah, that's what they had called me. A burden. Not to my face, of course. My father said it behind my back into a phone he didn't realize he hadn't hung up. But I heard every word. I heard how they laughed about manipulating me, how they plotted to claim the home as their retirement plan, how they pitied me for being so desperate for approval that I'd sign away my life if they just asked nicely enough. And for a long time they were right. I was desperate for love, for approval, for something that felt like family. I'd spent years convincing myself that I owed them something because they raised me, because they worked hard, because I didn't want to be seen as ungrateful. But in that moment, as I watched their Uber pull up from across the street, my heart pounding, my fists clenched, I realized something deeper. The real burden wasn't me. It was the constant weight of trying to prove I was worthy of love from people who only saw me as useful. So yes, I changed the locks. But this story didn't start with a slammed door or a bitter note. It started long before, in a small 2-bedroom rental in Cincinnati, where I learned that silence could be louder than any scream, and that love, if it came with strings, might not be love at all. Growing up, I was what you'd call an accidental second chance. My parents, Donna and Rick Morgan, had me later in life, long after they'd given up on the idea of kids. My father was a mechanic who never quite forgave the world for not handing him more. My mom was a receptionist who smiled for customers and sighed as soon as the phone clicked. Money was tight. Always. I never starved, but every birthday came with a warning. Don't expect too much this year. Okay, times are hard. Every school field trip came with a lecture. You know how many hours we have to work for that. And every report card, no matter how perfect, came with a shrug. Good. That's what we expect. Affection in our house was conditional. Praise came after guilt. And guilt came every time a bill arrived in the mail. But on weekends, I had my escape, my grandmother, June. She lived just 45 minutes outside the city in a white craftsman house with lavender bushes out front and a screened-in porch that smelled like old books and jasmine. She called me her brightest star, and when she said she was proud of me, she didn't add, but. Her house became my retreat, my sanctuary, the place I'd run to when the weight of home felt too much. I'd spend entire Saturdays there painting birdhouses, helping her rearrange the living room for the 5th time that month, or just sitting on the porch with iced tea and a crossword between us. She told me I could do anything, be anyone, and that I never had to become small just to keep other people comfortable. She was the only one who believed in me without a transaction. When I got into college on a scholarship because my parents couldn't afford a dime, Grandma June was the one who helped me move into my dorm. She packed my bags, handed me a $50 bill with tears in her eyes, and whispered, "You are not a burden, Claire. You're the blessing they forgot to count." I didn't know it then, but those words would become my anchor, especially on the day she died, and especially when I found out she left me that house. Free and clear. No conditions. Just mine. But I'll get to that. First, you need to know what happens when love turns into leverage, and when leverage meets its match. Because I might have been quiet. I might have been obedient. I might have even been desperate. But I was never weak. And when they called me a burden, that's when I decided this burden was done carrying them. I wasn't always this sure of myself. Growing up, I wore my obedience like armor. I thought if I just did everything right, every assignment, every chore, Every thank you I could earn the kind of affection that came so freely in my grandmother's home. But in my parents' house, love came through obligation and appreciation was always one missed step away from being revoked. It wasn't until I started building a life outside of their orbit that I even began to question that pattern. I worked 3 jobs to get through college, early morning shifts at a bakery, afternoons at the campus library, and late nights babysitting for professors. I never complained, not even when my friends partied on weekends, and I spent mine calculating whether I could afford a textbook or had to rely on the library copy. Still, I graduated with honors and walked across the stage in a $20 thrifted dress and borrowed heels. My parents showed up late and left early. My father complained about the parking. My mother said I looked tired in my graduation photos. But Grandma June, she stood in the front row, tears in her eyes, clapping like I'd just won the Nobel Prize. She gave me a tiny gold necklace that day with a small star pendant. "To remind you who you are," she said. "That necklace never left my neck until the day I sold the house, but I'm getting ahead of myself." After graduation, I got a job at a boutique real estate firm downtown. Nothing fancy, but solid. The kind of company where people still wore blazers and shook hands firmly. I started as an assistant, but I hustled. I learned contracts inside out, shadowed senior agents, and quietly took the difficult clients no one else wanted. Within 3 years, I'd earned my own license and my own desk. Money started to come in, not wealth, but breathing room. I saved aggressively, remembering all too well the late notices my parents used to toss in the trash like they were personal insults. And then, 4 years after I graduated, my world changed in a way I didn't ask for. Grandma June passed away. Heart attack. Quick, unfair. She'd been healthy, still spry in her early 70s, still painting her porch swing and arguing with the grocery clerk over produce prices. One day she was planting daffodils, the next, she was gone. It broke something in me I didn't know could still be broken. At the reading of the will, I sat between my parents, still numb, still thinking I might wake up and find her pruning roses in her backyard. But when the lawyer read her wishes, something else shattered. I leave the property at 1426 Sycamore Lane, along with its contents, to my granddaughter Claire Morgan. She has proven herself responsible, hard-working, and thoughtful beyond her years. I trust she will honor the home the way I always hoped someone would. My parents stiffened on either side of me. They were left a small cash inheritance, enough for maybe a new car or a few vacations, but not the house. Not the house. They didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. And when they did, they called it our family home. Not Grandma's, not Claire's, just ours, as if I were holding it hostage. At first, I let it go. Grief makes you soft. It makes you forgive things you shouldn't. They asked to move in temporarily just until we figure things out. I said yes. Of course I said yes. They were my parents. They'd just lost a parent too. I told myself it would be healing. Maybe we'd grow closer. Maybe they'd finally see me. Instead, they made themselves at home. Slowly, subtly, they changed things. Took over the master bedroom. Replaced furniture. Repainted walls. My mother started referring to the guest room as Claire's room. My father installed a new thermostat without asking and called it his investment. And every time I objected, even gently, they reminded me of all they had done for me. "You wouldn't have this life without us," my mom said once, folding laundry that wasn't hers. And for a long time I believed that. Until the day I heard them say it out loud. That I was nothing but a burden. And everything changed. When I inherited the house, I didn't see it as a transaction. I saw it as a trust. My grandmother hadn't just passed down a piece of property, she'd passed me a piece of herself. Every corner held a memory. The breakfast nook where she used to sneak me sugar cubes. The hallway lined with photos frames, slightly tilted like they were listening. The front porch where we sat during thunderstorms, watching lightning in comfortable silence. But to my parents, it was just square footage, equity, leverage. They never said it out loud, not at first. But the signs were there. "We should really open up that kitchen," my mom would say, running her fingers over granite countertops I had just paid to install. "This pink's gotta go," Dad grunted once, nodding at the living room walls. I had chosen that soft blush to match the velvet chairs Grandma loved. They'd already been thrown out. It was like death gave them permission to erase her. At first I justified it. "They're grieving," I told myself. "Change is hard." But the changes kept coming. Faster, louder. They hosted a dinner party without asking, rearranged furniture to their liking, and even handed out our address to friends as if it were theirs. My name was the only one on the deed, but their names were the ones on every conversation about our home. Then came the European vacation. It was something they always talked about when I was growing up, like a myth someday when we've earned it. Rome, Paris, maybe even Greece. It was their one-day dream. I never thought they'd go through with it, until my father brought it up at Sunday dinner. "We've been thinking," he said casually, like he was talking about repainting the garage. "We'd like to take a few months off and finally do that Europe trip. And well, we figured we could use some of the house's equity." I froze. "The equity from my house?" He smiled like it was a misunderstanding. "Claire, don't be selfish. It's the family home. We're not selling it. Just a little loan. It's smart. Strategic." My mother chimed in, sipping wine I'd bought at a table I'd refinished. "Your grandmother would have wanted us all to benefit. We let you live here, remember?" Let me. As if I hadn't inherited it. As if they hadn't moved in without paying a single bill. I refused the equity loan. I told them plainly the house wasn't collateral for vacation dreams. But somehow, because guilt is a language I was fluent in, I offered to help. I covered flights, booked hotels, even sent them off with a prepaid travel card just in case. They hugged me at the airport like I was their sponsor, not their daughter. And for 6 weeks I tried to forget the tension. I took long walks. I hosted a book club. I repainted the guest room they never asked about. I almost started to breathe again. Then came the leak. The kitchen faucet, the only thing my dad had actually fixed in the house, was dripping again. I needed the warranty info. So I called his international number. "Hey, Dad," I said, chipper, pretending we were normal. "Quick question. Do you remember where you left the faucet paperwork?" He sighed into the phone like I was asking him to cancel dinner with the Queen. "In the filing cabinet, second drawer under kitchen." "Can't this wait?" "There's water damage," I said, keeping my voice light. Fine, fine. We're about to go to some restaurant near the Eiffel Tower." I thanked him, told him to enjoy dinner. Then I heard rustling. The call was still on. And then, "Who was that?" My mom's voice, casual. "Claire," he said, whining about something with the sink again. I moved to hang up. But I didn't. Not yet. Not when I heard my mother say all she does is find problems. And definitely not when my father followed up with "she's always been a burden." My chest locked. I couldn't breathe. And yet I listened. Because some truths don't scream. They whisper. And what I heard next would burn everything I thought I knew to the ground. I should have hung up. I should have pressed that little red button and walked away. But something, curiosity, heartbreak, maybe instinct, froze me in place. I held the phone to my ear like it was a grenade and waited for it to explode. And it did. "I don't understand why your mother left her that house," my mom muttered. "We're her parents. It should have gone to us." I gripped the countertop, trying to stay upright. My knees felt like rubber. "Once we're back," my dad continued, "we need to have a serious conversation about our retirement. That house is our security, whether Claire likes it or not." I could hear them walking, probably down some cobblestone street in Paris, casually dismantling everything I thought was sacred between us. "She's been a burden from the start," Dad said. I flinched physically like I'd been slapped. All those years of expenses, college, everything, and now she's got this house like it just fell into her lap. He scoffed. "What has she ever done to deserve it?" "I told you," my mother added, her voice taking on that sing-song tone she used when gossiping. "She's easy to manipulate. I just had to mention family obligation and she basically paid for the whole trip." They laughed. Actually laughed. That same laugh I used to hear at the dinner table when I made a mistake or got too excited about something. a synchrony of mockery. We just need to keep working on her, Dad said. Eventually she'll add us to the deed, or sign it over. She still wants us to be proud of her. And if not, my mom said, lowering her voice, we start bringing up medical expenses, nursing homes. Guilt works better than logic. Exactly, Dad replied. Worst case scenario, we're living there anyway. Possession is 9/10 of the law. She'd never evict her own parents. They laughed again. I hit record. My hands were trembling, but I got it. I got all of it. The manipulation, the entitlement, the calculated way they saw me, not as a daughter, not even as a person, but as a resource. A vessel. A bank account that cooked dinner. Then came the final blow. When we get back, Dad said, I think we should take the master bedroom. It's ridiculous that she's got the biggest room when she's barely even there. Agreed, my mom replied. And we need to talk her out of that second property she's been eyeing. Waste of money. If she's got that kind of cash, she should be helping us more. I couldn't listen anymore. I ended the call, slid my phone onto the table, and just stared at nothing. It's funny what happens in moments like that. You expect a scream, a plate-shattering rage. But I just sat there in silence, hands in my lap, letting the words echo like gunshots in an empty church. A burden, a means to an end, a pawn in their retirement strategy. Everything inside me, every desperate hope that maybe they'd changed, that maybe we'd turned a corner, curled up, and died right there in my grandmother's kitchen. And when that part of me died, something else rose. Not revenge, not bitterness, just clarity. I looked around the room, at the furniture I'd paid for, the wallpaper I'd chosen, the dishes my grandmother had left which my mother now insisted were hers. Suddenly everything looked foreign. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage, a set. And I'd been cast in a play I never agreed to be in. That night I didn't cry, I didn't rant. I opened my laptop and started a spreadsheet. I labeled it Exit Plan. And for the first time in years, I stopped asking how to earn their love. I started asking how to earn my freedom. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was sick, though the ache in my chest felt like a fever that couldn't be medicated, but because I knew I couldn't show houses with a fake smile while my world was collapsing underneath me. I opened my laptop, stared at the spreadsheet I'd started the night before, and began filling in the pieces of my escape. First, legal clarity. I called Patricia Ames, a family law attorney I had worked with on a couple of messy divorce closings. She was smart, blunt, and allergic to sugarcoating, exactly what I needed. I laid out everything: the inheritance, the living situation, the phone call, the manipulation. I didn't even try to hide my voice cracking as I recounted their plan to take the master bedroom and eventually the whole house. When I finished, Patricia didn't hesitate. Claire, let me be perfectly clear. That house is yours, legally, financially, unequivocally. They have no claim. You could change the locks today, and you'd be within your rights. I exhaled, shaky but stronger than before. What about their stuff? You're not obligated to let them back in to collect it personally. The smart move is to place their belongings in a storage unit paid for and documented, and notify them when and where they can retrieve it. Keeps the emotion out of it. Can I sell the house? Of course. It's your name on the deed. If you want, I can recommend a colleague for the closing. No, I said quietly. I've got that covered. That night, I reached out to my colleague, Jordan Castillo. He was known in our firm for being discreet and effective, handled sensitive sales like divorce splits and estate cleanouts where silence was golden. We met at a quiet coffee shop tucked in a booth by the window. I need this sold, I told him, sliding over the address and estimated value. Fast, private, no public listing, no sign in the yard, no open house. Ideally within 6 weeks. He blinked. Claire, that's tight. You'll take a hit on price. I know. He studied me for a moment. Is this a safety thing? Let's just say it's a boundary thing. Jordan nodded, then tapped the table twice. I can make it happen. I've got a couple of buyers in that price range. No kids' corporate relocations. They move fast. Good, I said, because I want to be gone before they even land at JFK. The rest of the week became a blur of motion. I made lists, boxes, plans. I opened new bank accounts at a different branch, bought a burner phone with a new number, set up a new email address. I even booked a short-term furnished rental 2 towns over under a pseudonym just for peace of mind. At night, I'd sit on the floor of my room. No, the room. It didn't feel like mine anymore, and cross off tasks on my exit plan. Banking, attorney, storage unit. I inventoried every item in the house, what was mine, what was theirs, what had belonged to Grandma. I was brutal about it. If I couldn't prove something was mine, I put it in their column. No gray areas, no room for accusations. The house was becoming less of a home and more of a blueprint, a battlefield I was carefully retreating from step by step. On the 5th night, while packing a box of old letters, I found it an envelope, yellowing with age, tucked behind my grandmother's recipe binder. It was addressed to me in her handwriting. No stamp. I opened it with shaking hands. "My dearest Claire," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm likely gone, and I need you to remember this one truth. You earned everything that's coming to you. Not because I gave it, but because you've lived with grace in a world that didn't always return it. Your parents, they've struggled. But don't let their struggle become your chain. This house is yours not to carry others, but to carry yourself." I wept, harder than I had in years. Because even from beyond the grave, Grandma June was still reminding me who I was. And that's when I knew. I wasn't just walking away from my parents. I was walking toward the version of me she always believed in. By the end of week 3, the transformation was almost complete. What once was a home filled with framed memories, scented candles, and the comfort of routine had become a transition zone. Every drawer had been sorted, every item tagged and boxed. My belongings were stacked neatly in the hallway, labeled for movers. My parents' possessions were wrapped with the same care, but marked for a different destination, a storage unit I'd prepaid 6 months on. They'd get the access code and instructions mailed to their Paris hotel. No confrontation necessary. No chance for gaslighting. The only thing left was the sale. Jordan had done his part. He brought in 2 serious buyers, both corporate executives looking for something move-in ready. One of them, a couple from Seattle relocating to the East Coast, walked through the house privately on a Wednesday afternoon. By Friday morning, they'd made an offer, $959, clean terms, willing to close in under 3 weeks. I didn't hesitate. I signed the acceptance the same night, then leaned back in my chair, staring at the offer summary, like it was a passport out of prison. But even as the numbers stared back at me, solid, satisfying, I felt the ache in my chest grow heavier. Not regret, not second-guessing. Grief. Grief for what the house had represented, what it was supposed to be. This wasn't just real estate. This was the space where Grandma taught me how to plant tomatoes. The kitchen where we baked cookies and licked the beaters clean. The back porch where she'd let me cry through my first heartbreak while pretending not to notice the tears. And now I was walking away from it. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. Because some roots, no matter how deep, can strangle you if you let them. That weekend I walked through every room one last time. In the living room, I found one of my dad's old recliners, his throne he used to call it, strategically placed in front of the best view of the TV. It didn't match the decor. It had never belonged in this house. But somehow, it had claimed the best corner without asking. Just like they had. I sat in it for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then I stood, unplugged the TV, and packed it away. Upstairs in the room that used to be mine and had slowly become theirs, I found a small shoebox pushed to the back of the closet. Curious, I opened it. Letters. Dozens of them. All written by Grandma June. All addressed to my parents. Some were soft offers to help with bills. Encouragement. Hopes that things might change. But others were sharp. Warnings. This is the last time I will assist without a repayment plan. I worry about the entitlement I see growing in your expectations. Claire deserves more than what you're teaching her. My home will not be your safety net. Plan accordingly. I sat on the floor of that room for an hour, reading every word. My grandmother had seen it all. She hadn't been blind to who they were. She had simply chosen to love me through it and prepare for the day I'd need to love myself more. I placed the box back where I found it, careful not to damage a single envelope. I labeled it with their names and added it to the pile headed for storage. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because my bed was packed, though it was, but because the bedroom no longer felt like mine. The whole house didn't. It was a structure now. An asset. A tool in a bigger plan. The next morning, I woke up early. Coffee. Final checklist. Movers scheduled for 10 a.m. I left the front door unlocked so they could walk in freely. When the trucks pulled up, I pointed to the 2 stacks. "This one goes to the rental in Revengele," I said, tapping the labeled boxes. "That one goes to the storage unit in Maple Creek. I've already sent the lock code." The movers nodded, no questions asked. Just another job. As they worked, I paced the empty halls. The walls echoed louder without the furniture. My footsteps felt amplified, like the house itself was exhaling for the first time in years. At noon, everything was gone. All that remained was a granite countertop, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, and the note. I wrote it slowly, carefully. "Surprise. A burden did this." I folded it in half, placed it squarely where they'd see it the second they walked in. Then I locked the door, dropped the key through the mail slot, and walked away without looking back. Freedom is quiet at first. There was no trumpet sound as I drove away from Sycamore Lane. No cinematic swell of music. Just the soft hum of tires on pavement and the weightless feeling of leaving something behind. Not just a house, but a history. I arrived at my temporary rental just after sunset. It was a furnished 1-bedroom apartment in Revengele, a town I'd never had a reason to visit before. The place was basic, clean, beige carpet, cookie-cutter kitchen, and a small balcony that overlooked a man-made pond with ducks that always looked mildly annoyed. It wasn't home, but it was mine. I set up my laptop first, somehow plugging in the Wi-Fi felt symbolic. Then the Essentials Toiletries coffee maker, the book I always read when I feel unmoored. And finally, I placed Grandma's star necklace on the nightstand. The chain was starting to tarnish, but I didn't care. It was my anchor. The first night I didn't sleep much. My brain spun with every what if. What if they showed up at my office? What if they found out where I was staying? What if they tried to file some bogus legal complaint? What if I was overreacting? But the next morning my new inbox pinged. Subject: final closing documents. There it was. My name. The buyer's signature. The wire transfer confirmation. The house was officially no longer mine. I stared at the email for a long time, not crying, not angry, just still, because it was done. And now came the hardest part: staying gone. I took 2 weeks off work. I told my boss I needed time for personal matters, and to her credit, she didn't ask questions, just said to let her know if I needed anything. During the day, I took long walks and ordered takeout. At night, I tried to read, but mostly I just scrolled through online articles about estranged families, boundary setting, and strangely enough, financial abuse. That term kept popping up. Financial abuse. At first, I didn't think it applied to me. I wasn't in a romantic relationship. I hadn't been cut off or controlled in obvious ways. But the more I read, the more I recognized the symptoms: guilt as currency, manipulation disguised as love, pressure masked as parental duty. It hit me like a punch to the chest. They hadn't just crossed emotional boundaries. They had financially abused me for years. Suddenly everything made sense. The guilt tripping over college. The silent expectations that I'd support them. The gaslighting around the house. It had all been about control, and I had finally taken it back. Later that week, I found a letter I hadn't opened yet, one I had mailed to myself before the move. It was part of an exercise I did in therapy a year earlier. Write a letter to your future self describing the life you want and what you're afraid of. I opened it, hands shaking. "Dear Claire," it began. "I hope by now you've stopped waiting for their approval. I hope you've realized that love you have to beg for isn't love at all. I hope you chose yourself." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it neatly, placed it next to Grandma's necklace, and whispered out loud, "I did. 10 days after the sale closed, my old phone, still active for emergencies, lit up like a Christmas tree. Calls, texts, voicemails, all from my parents. I didn't listen to a single one. I forwarded everything to Patricia, my attorney. She called me that afternoon. "They're rattling cages," she said dryly. "But you've done everything legally and cleanly. Let them squawk. You're protected." And for the first time in my life, I was truly protected. By more than the law. By myself. The messages from my parents shifted tone faster than a weather app in April. First came confusion. "Claire, what's going on?" Then indignation. "We just got home and our key doesn't work." Followed swiftly by guilt-laced panic. "We're worried about you. Please call us. We just want to talk." And finally, thinly veiled threats. "You've made a huge mistake. We're consulting a lawyer." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words. I had plenty. But because I finally understood that no amount of explanation would make them hear me. They never heard me. Not really. So I let Patricia handle it. She reminded me again that I was well within my rights. The sale was legal. The documents airtight. Their names had never been on the deed, and I had records for every dollar spent on the house. They had nothing except entitlement. And that didn't hold up in court. Still, I braced myself. They didn't disappoint. The next morning, I got a text from Jamie, a colleague at my firm. "Hey, your parents just showed up. Causing a scene. Boss told them you're on vacation and had security escort them out. You okay?" I took a deep breath. Then I replied with 3 words. "Family drama. Thanks." A few hours later, my boss called. "Claire," she said carefully, "I don't want to pry, but they came in demanding to know your whereabouts. Said you sold their house behind their backs. Is that true?" My heart thudded. I answered plainly. It wasn't their house. It was mine. My grandmother left it to me. They were living there, yes, but they had no legal rights. I discovered they were planning to manipulate me into signing it over, so I sold it before they returned from vacation. I know it's messy. I'm sorry it landed at the office. There was a pause. Then she exhaled. "Honestly, good for you." I blinked. "What? I've seen how hard you work. And frankly, no one should have to deal with manipulation like that. You've got our support. Take all the time you need. Just keep us updated, okay?" Another weight lifted. Later that evening, I got the email I expected because of course they'd find a new way in. Someone, likely a well-meaning old neighbor, had given my new email address to my parents. Subject line, "Let's talk about what happened." It was long, rambling, a masterclass in revisionist history. They claimed I had misunderstood a private conversation, that I'd overreacted, that I'd broken their trust, that they were willing to forgive me but only if I used the money from the house to buy a new home, one that we could all live in, together. I nearly laughed. Even now, after all, that they were still trying to get their hands on what wasn't theirs. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Patricia with a simple note just documenting. She responded within an hour. "Smart. Stay no contact. They're baiting you. Let it sit." So I did. The next day, I packed the last of my boxes at the temporary rental and signed the lease on a small townhouse just outside Richmond. Nothing fancy but warm. It had a little fireplace, a balcony, and most importantly, locks only I held the keys to. It wasn't just a new home. It was a declaration. I wouldn't go back. Not to them. Not to that version of myself who begged to be seen. I hung Grandma's necklace by the front door. Like a charm. Or a shield. This was mine, and no one would take it again. My new place felt eerily quiet at first. Not the kind of silence that comes from isolation, but the kind that follows after a storm, where you can still hear the thunder if you listen hard enough, but all that's left are fallen branches and the sharp scent of wet earth. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time. I chose where things went. Every drawer, every shelf, every photo, I picked them deliberately. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to keep anyone comfortable but myself, and that realization, it was both liberating and unfamiliar. But the peace didn't last. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from my old neighbor, Rachel Chin. She and Grandma used to swap zucchini bread recipes and gossip about HOA meetings. She was one of the few people from the old life I still trusted. "Claire," she said, her voice tense. "I thought you should know. Your parents are at the old house. Just sitting in their car, parked out front." My stomach flipped. "That's not their house anymore." "I know," she said. "The new owners are out of town, but they've been sitting there for almost an hour. I figured you'd want to know." I thanked her, then hung up and called Richard Thompson, the buyer who now owned Sycamore Lane. A former exec from Seattle, he had relocated for work and had been respectful and professional throughout the entire process. He picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Claire," he said. "Everything okay?" I explained quickly. Told him my parents were on the property. That I wasn't sure what they planned, but I wanted him to be aware. His tone changed immediately. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll notify my security company and the local police department just in case. Don't worry, I've got it handled." He was calm, collected, but I could tell he was concerned. That evening, as I was folding laundry, my phone rang again, this time from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Claire." Just one word, but I knew that voice. My father. Tight, controlled, angry. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. 10 a.m., Maple Street Coffee. If you don't show up, we're going to your office again. And we won't leave quietly." Click. He didn't give me a chance to respond. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart pounding. Then I called Patricia. She was, as always, direct. "You're not obligated to meet them. If you want, we can file a restraining order based on those threats." "Seriously, Claire, you've done everything right. You owe them nothing." I considered it, truly. But something inside me shifted. I didn't want to hide anymore. Not from them. Not from the confrontation I'd spent my whole life avoiding. "No," I said. "I'm going to meet them, but on my terms." "Then be careful," Patricia warned. "Pick a public place. Don't go alone. And record everything." So I did. The next morning, I arrived at Maple Street Coffee 15 minutes late on purpose. I wanted them to sit in their own discomfort for once. I wore my sharpest blazer, my cleanest lines, my version of armor. They were easy to spot, back corner table tension radiating off them like static. My mother's hair was frizzy. My father's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. I walked up slowly, then greeted them clearly, deliberately. "Robert, Diane." Their heads snapped up. My mother flinched. My father's face darkened. I sat down calmly, placing my phone face up on the table between us. "Recording. Always." My mother gestured to it. "Is that really necessary?" "Yes," I replied. "Given our history, I record all important meetings now." "But we're your parents," my father snapped. "And you threatened my workplace," I said flatly. "This isn't a family talk, it's damage control." They weren't used to this version of me. The one who didn't beg. The one who didn't flinch. The silence between us felt like glass. And I had no problem being the one to shatter it. My father leaned in, voice low but sharp enough to cut steel. "What you did was unforgivable." I didn't blink. "You mean selling my house?" His jaw flexed. "It was our home, Claire. You sold it out from under us." "It was never yours," I said calmly. "It was mine. I let you live there, generously, freely, and you repaid that by plotting to steal it from me." My mother opened her mouth, eyes watering. "Claire, honey, we didn't." I held up a hand and pressed play on my phone. Their voices filled the space between us, grainy but unmistakable. "She's been a burden from the start. She's easy to manipulate. We'll just talk about nursing homes. Make her feel guilty." My mom gasped audibly. My father's eyes narrowed like slits. A few customers glanced over, sensing tension in the air. I hit pause. "You recorded us," my dad barked. "That's illegal." I shook my head. "Not in this state. One-party consent." "And guess what you called me?" "You just forgot to hang up." My mother's face crumpled. "You misunderstood." "Don't," I snapped sharper than I meant. "Don't insult me further by pretending this was out of context. I sat in that house you called yours, listening to the two people I've spent my entire life trying to please talk about me like I was a pawn, like I was a plan, not a person." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My father leaned back, face reddening. So that's it. You're just cutting us off. I took a breath. I'm setting boundaries. Clear ones. I'm not your bank. I'm not your retirement plan. I'm not your emotional punching bag. From this point forward, I will not provide you with any financial support. I will not share my address. I will not respond to harassment. If you contact my job again, I will pursue legal action. They stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. You're so ungrateful, my mother whispered. No, I said, voice quiet but firm. I'm exhausted. My father's expression twisted. Everything you have is because of us. I almost laughed. Everything I have is in spite of you. He shot up from his chair, scraping it loudly across the floor. His voice dropped into a threatening growl. You better hope we don't find a way to sue you. Go ahead, I said, standing to meet him eye to eye. You'll lose. My mom began crying, big performative sobs, the kind she used to fake in front of teachers or neighbors. But this time I didn't feel guilt. Just pity. What do you even want from us? She asked, wiping at her tears with a tissue from her purse. I looked at them both. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see them as authority figures or gatekeepers to love. I saw two deeply flawed people clinging to control because they were terrified of what they'd be without it. I want acknowledgement, I said quietly. That you used me, that you saw me as a resource, not a daughter, that every ounce of affection came with strings attached. My father scoffed. This is ridiculous. And I want space, I continued undeterred. To rebuild my life without carrying your resentment, your expectations, your debts. My mom's voice cracked. So we're just supposed to disappear? No, I said. You're supposed to reflect. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. This is the storage unit address. It contains all your things. You have 6 months of prepaid access. After that, it's on you. I slid it across the table. My father didn't touch it. My mother stared at it like it was a verdict. This isn't what family does, she whispered. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, this is what freedom does. I stood, gathered my phone, and turned to go. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back to see if they were watching. Outside the coffee shop, the autumn air was crisp. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and the smell of roasted beans still clung to my blazer. I stood for a moment, just breathing. No tears, no shaking, just calm. For so long I had imagined that confrontation, playing it over in my mind late at night. Sometimes I pictured myself yelling, other times begging, but never this quiet resolve. A clean break. I walked to my car and slid into the driver's seat, not rushing, not looking over my shoulder. It was done. I drove home, my home windows cracked just enough to let in the breeze. The silence was no longer heavy. It was mine. Back at the townhouse, I kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch. It was still sparsely furnished, just a couch, a lamp, a small bookshelf, but it felt like peace. The next morning, I woke up early and emailed Patricia. Subject: follow-up. Body met them. Said what I needed. Delivered the storage info. No threats, but definitely tension. Will continue no contact unless legal action is necessary. Thank you again for everything. Her reply came back within 10 minutes. Proud of you. Let's hope this is the last we hear from them. But if it isn't, you know I've got you. It hit me reading that line. You know I've got you. Because for most of my life, no one really had me. Not without a catch. But now I was building a circle of people. My boss, my lawyer, my therapist, even colleagues who supported me without keeping score, who saw me as a person, not a product of guilt or obligation. And that changed everything. Later that afternoon, I stopped by a bookstore downtown. I wandered the aisles for over an hour, breathing in the scent of ink and paper, brushing my fingers across titles I might never read. I left with a stack of paperbacks and a planner I didn't need but wanted, because I could. That evening, I took out the old family photo albums from one of my boxes. I hadn't opened them in years. They were a mess of faded snapshots. Birthday parties, school concerts, vacations where we smiled for the camera, but said nothing in the car ride home. One photo stopped me cold. Me around 9, sitting on my dad's shoulders at a county fair. Cotton candy in one hand, my other fist clenched triumphantly in the air. We were both laughing. And I remembered that day. He won me a stuffed bear after 4 failed tries. My mom bought lemonade. We stayed until dark. Not every memory was poisoned, and that made it harder, not easier. Because that's how emotional entanglement works, mixing warmth with pain, making you question the whole picture because part of it was beautiful. But clarity doesn't mean erasing the good. It means understanding the whole. So I tucked the photo back into the album, slid it into a bin marked "Not Now," and placed it in the back of the hall closet. Maybe someday I'd want to look again. But not today. That night, I went for a walk. The townhouse complex was quiet. A few porch lights glowed. Somewhere a dog barked half-heartedly. The sky was so clear you could see Orion. I stood there, hands in my pockets, staring up at those stars. And I thought of Grandma June, of the letter she wrote, of the star-shaped necklace still hanging by my door. And I said it out loud like a prayer or a promise. "I'm okay, Grandma. I made it." 6 weeks passed. No new emails. No new voicemails. Silence, real, intentional silence for the first time since I'd claimed my life back. And with each day, that silence became less unsettling and more sacred. I kept my circle small. Work, therapy, books, and the occasional dinner with Megan, an old college friend I had reconnected with since everything unraveled. She was everything my parents never approved of: loud, unfiltered, fiercely independent. Which is probably why I loved being around her. "You're glowing," she said one night over pasta and wine. Seriously, like disturbingly well-adjusted. I laughed. "That's the therapy. Twice a week and no parental contact will do wonders for your skin." She raised her glass. "To emotional exfoliation. To clean slates," I replied. But not everything was light. There were moments I still questioned myself. Nights where I'd scroll through old texts or reread that letter from Grandma, wondering if I had been too harsh, too final. Was there something I missed? Some chance to fix it without burning it all down? Those questions haunted me, quiet and persistent, so I brought them into therapy. Dr. Lindsay, warm, firm, never judgmental, let me speak every fear out loud. "I wonder if I overreacted," I told her. "Maybe I should have confronted them before selling the house, given them a chance to explain." She leaned forward. "Claire, what do you think they would have said?" I didn't answer right away, because I knew the truth. They would have denied it, or twisted it, or blamed the stress. They would have said I misunderstood, that they were joking, that I was too sensitive. And would any of that change what you heard? No. She nodded. Exactly. Sometimes clarity doesn't need confirmation. Then she said something I'll never forget. "What you experienced was financial abuse." The words hit like cold water. I sat still, absorbing it. I always thought abuse had to be violent or cruel, not guilt trips and manipulation. She gave me that patient therapist smile. Abuse wears many faces, and the hardest one to see is the one that comes dressed as family. That moment became a turning point. I started reading about financial abuse, about how it thrives in silence, often within families, about how so many daughters, sons, even partners are trained to believe that love and sacrifice are inseparable, that if you set boundaries, you're selfish. And the more I read, the more I recognized myself in those stories. People whose parents demanded access to bank accounts. People who were told they owed everything to the ones who raised them, even if what they raised them in was shame. So I decided to do something with what I'd learned. At our next team meeting, I pitched an idea to my broker, Vanessa. "I want to start a workshop," I told her. "Something for first-time homebuyers, especially women, about how to recognize and protect themselves from financial manipulation." She didn't blink. "That's brilliant." And just like that, I started building something new. The workshop was called Building Foundations, a simple title with a deeper message. It wasn't just about buying property. It was about claiming ownership of your life. The first session drew 16 people. By the third, we had to move to a larger space. They came with stories, some whispered, some raw. Parents who demanded cosigns, partners who sabotaged credit, friends who borrowed and never returned. And they left with tools, with plans, with language they'd never had before. One woman hugged me after class and said, "You made me feel like I'm not crazy." And I realized this was what healing looked like. Not just surviving, but reaching back to pull others forward with you. That night, I lit a candle in my new living room. No ghosts, no guilt, just me and the quiet hum of freedom. I poured a glass of wine and whispered again, just for her. "I'm okay, Grandma. And I'm helping others get okay too." The workshop changed more than just my weekends, it changed my purpose. For the first time, my work wasn't just about closing deals or climbing career ladders. It became about something deeper, protecting people from the quiet theft I didn't recognize until it almost cost me everything. After a glowing feature in a local women's magazine titled "Financial Freedom: Claire Morgan's Mission to End Financial Manipulation," I started receiving messages from strangers, from old classmates, even from a few agents at other firms. Each message told a story. A mother who demanded control of her daughter's paycheck. A boyfriend who maxed out credit cards in her name. A son whose dad used his identity to take out loans without ever asking. I read every message. I answered as many as I could. I created a resource page and shared it freely. I hosted Q&As, invited therapists and financial counselors to co-host, and slowly something beautiful happened. People started standing up for themselves. They emailed me when they canceled co-signing a loan. They messaged me when they finally said no. They showed up not as victims, but as people reclaiming power that had always been theirs. They just needed permission to believe it. It was around this time that I got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was warm, a bit shaky but familiar. "Claire, it's Aunt Ellen, your grandmother's sister. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. I read your article," she continued. I wanted to say how proud your grandmother would be. What you're doing, it's exactly what she hoped for when she left you that house." Tears welled instantly. "Thank you. She saw the truth in your father a long time ago," Aunt Ellen said gently. "He was always expecting someone else to clean up his messes. But you've always stood on your own." We met for lunch the following week. She shared stories I'd never heard of my father's childhood tantrums, his lifelong refusal to take responsibility, of how Grandma June had tried over and over to help him grow, but eventually realized he never would. "She loved you fiercely," Aunt Ellen told me, reaching across the table. "And she knew you'd honor that home, that you'd use it not as a cushion, but as a launching pad." That evening, I reread the letter Grandma left me. "Your parents, they've struggled, but don't let their struggle become your chain." She had seen everything, understood everything. She gave me more than a house. She gave me the clarity to walk away when the time came. A few weeks later, I received one last email from my parents. I recognized the address immediately. A burner Gmail account they had likely created after I blocked them everywhere else. The subject line read, "We just want to talk." The body was predictably manipulative. They said they missed me, that they didn't understand why things had gone so far, that they hoped we could start fresh, that family is family and that life is too short to stay mad. But nowhere in that message was the word sorry. Not once. I didn't respond. Instead, I created a new filter in my inbox. Auto-delete. Some things didn't need a response. Some doors once closed should stay closed. Because now I was building something far greater than forgiveness. I was building peace. And I wasn't going to trade it for anything, not even their approval. Not anymore. The 1-year anniversary of selling the house came quietly. No drama, no emails, no unexpected knocks. Just a soft Sunday morning sunlight through the blinds and a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like closure. I took the day off work and drove to the cemetery where Grandma June was buried. I hadn't been there in a while, not out of avoidance, but because I had finally stopped seeking permission to live my life. Still that day I wanted to go. I brought pink peonies, her favorite, and sat down next to her headstone. The granite was smooth beneath my palm. The engraved quote beneath her name read, "To grow wild and strong." She had picked it herself. I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me, I said softly. About standing up. About letting go. I told her everything. About the workshop, the townhouse, Aunt Ellen. The emails I no longer read. The freedom that didn't always feel loud but felt deep and steady like roots finally growing in healthy soil. I sat there for over an hour watching the clouds move slowly across a blue-gray sky. For once, I didn't feel the pull of guilt or the ache of doubt. I felt light. And then something strange happened. As I turned to leave, I saw a young woman walking through the rows of graves. She looked maybe 25. Tired, pale, a little lost. She clutched a single daisy in one hand and wore the same expression I had a year ago. Is it okay to let go? We made eye contact briefly. I offered a small smile. She nodded back. And just like that, I saw myself in her. That was the moment I knew this story wasn't just mine. That the pain I carried, the clarity I fought for, the boundaries I built, they weren't unique. They were part of a larger truth. That sometimes the people who raise you also raise the walls you must later climb over. Back home, I dug out the note I'd left on the kitchen counter a year ago. Surprise, a burden did this. At the time, it had been a gut punch, a mic drop. My way of reclaiming power from those who misused it. But now, I read it differently. Not bitter, not smug, just resolved. Sometimes the heaviest burden we carry isn't the guilt others place on us. It's the need to be loved by people who only love us conditionally. That's the weight I laid down. That's the surprise I gave them and myself. Freedom, not fire. Peace, not permission. I placed the note gently in a keepsake box with Grandma's letter and the original deed to the house. Symbols, not shackles. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The work I was doing, helping others, reclaiming dignity, breaking cycles, that was my new legacy. That evening, Megan and I hosted a small dinner at my townhouse. Just a few friends. Real ones. The kind who show up because they want to, not because they expect something. As we raised our glasses to toast the night, I offered a quiet one of my own. To the woman I was, and the woman I'm becoming. And deep in my bones, I felt Grandma smile. 6 months later, the workshop had expanded far beyond anything I ever imagined. We'd gone from folding chairs in a borrowed conference room to a regular monthly event sponsored by 3 real estate firms and a local credit union. I partnered with financial advisors, trauma counselors, and even a tech startup focused on secure financial planning for women. The name stuck, building foundations. But more than that, the mission stuck. Because every time someone sat down in the front row, nervous and unsure, I saw pieces of my old self. And every time they walked out, head higher, questions answered, voice stronger, I felt something repair inside me too. One night, after a particularly emotional session, a woman in her 50s lingered after the others had gone. Her name was Denise. She'd spent 30 years married to a man who made her ask for grocery money while he hid savings in a separate account. He'd told her she was bad with money, that women shouldn't worry about finances, and that she should be grateful. And she had believed it until her daughter left for college and asked Mom, "Why don't you have your own account?" That simple question cracked something open. I never realized it was abuse, Denise said, voice shaking. Until tonight. I squeezed her hand. I didn't either. Until it was almost too late. She nodded, tears brimming. Thank you for being the person you needed when you were younger. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed staring at my reflection in the window. Not to admire, not to judge, just to see myself. The woman looking back wasn't desperate for approval. She wasn't seeking someone's permission to speak, or space to exist. She was centered, steady, whole. And for the first time in my life, I realized something else. My parents didn't break me. They just revealed what needed to be healed. That weekend, I got a call from Vanessa, my boss. We're opening a new office, she said. Downtown. Bigger, more community-centered. I want you to lead it. I blinked. Me. She laughed. You've built more trust and impact in 1 year than some agents do in 10. Your work matters, Claire. I want that energy front and center. I said yes. Not because I needed the title, but because I knew what I would do with the platform. Use it, share it, multiply it. The grand reopening was set for late spring. Flowers blooming, windows wide, a perfect time for new chapters. That night, after the final planning meeting, I stood outside the building and looked up at the clean slate of glass where the sign would go. And I whispered again because some words are worth repeating. I'm not a burden. Then I walked inside and got to work. Life doesn't always give you clean breaks. Sometimes healing looks like a slow unlearning, a quiet process of separating who you are from who you were taught to be. For most of my life, I believed love meant sacrifice, that to be accepted, I had to shrink, be agreeable, be useful. But real love, it doesn't demand proof. It doesn't twist kindness into obligation. It holds space for who you are, not who someone wants you to be. Looking back now, I don't regret the house, or the money, or even the confrontation. Because those things forced me to face the truth that I wasn't broken. I was buried beneath layers of expectation, guilt, control. And once I cleared that debris, I found something rare, not just peace, but wholeness. I still have tough days. Memories creep in like drafts through a window left ajar, but I don't chase them out anymore. I acknowledge them. I let them pass, because the difference now is I'm not afraid of who I am without their approval. I'm not afraid to take up space, to say no, to say enough. And maybe that's the real inheritance Grandma left me. Not a house, not a deed, but the quiet, unwavering belief that I am allowed to choose myself. So if you're listening, whether you've been called a burden or made to feel small, I want you to hear this. You don't have to stay where love costs your dignity. You don't have to apologize for saving yourself. And you are not a burden. You are a beginning. Now go build something beautiful.